There is a skeleton in a storage facility beneath the Iraqi National Museum in Baghdad that has not been displayed publicly since 1968. It was discovered in 1927 during Sir Leonard Woolley's excavation of the Royal Cemetery at Ur, one of the most extensively documented archaeological campaigns of the 20th century. It was catalogued as burial PG 789. The tomb inscription identified the occupant as Mes-kiag-gasher, a name recorded in the Sumerian King List as a ruler who reigned before the Great Flood. The initial examination was conducted by the expedition's own medical staff. They documented what they observed. Then they stopped. The observations were filed. The bones were shipped. They were not sealed because the findings were unremarkable. Every attempt to classify these remains using standard human anatomical frameworks produced the same result. The frameworks did not apply. The bones do not correspond to Homo sapiens. They do not correspond to any known hominin species in the fossil record. They remain in storage, catalogued, present, and officially unexplained, while the institutions best positioned to resolve this question have, for nearly 60 years, chosen not to look. Here is what makes this irreconcilable with the standard account of ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerian King List is a clay tablet documenting every ruler of Sumer from the beginning of kingship. Scholars accept its post-flood records as broadly historical. The pre-flood section, kings with reigns measured in thousands of years, is categorically dismissed as mythology. Mes-kiag-gasher is a pre-flood king. The list credits him with 324 years of rule. It describes him as both king and high priest. And for his end, it uses a phrase that appears nowhere else in the entire document. He entered the sea and ascended to the mountains. Not death, not burial, departure. If the physical anomalies documented in 1927 are what the expedition records indicate, and we are going to go through those records precisely, then what we are looking at is not mythology preserved in cuneiform, it is a biological record. The Royal Cemetery at Ur was excavated between 1922 and 1934 by Leonard Woolley under joint sponsorship from the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. Woolley's team uncovered more than 1,800 graves. 16 were designated royal tombs, distinguished by elaborate construction, extensive grave goods, and evidence of mass human sacrifice, where attendants were buried alive alongside their rulers. Burial PG 789 was identified as royal from the first day of excavation, but it stood apart from every other royal burial at the site in 4 ways that Woolley's own field notes describe, in measured language, as anomalous. First, it was located at a depth that placed it stratigraphically earlier than the surrounding royal tombs, not by decades, but by what the sediment analysis suggested were centuries. Second, the tomb chamber was constructed with a type of stone not found in the local geology of Ur and not recorded in use at any other Ur burial despite the extraordinary wealth available to later kings. The stone had to have been transported. The expedition records do not establish from where. Third, the grave goods associated with PG 789 included metalwork that Woolley's notes describe as inconsistent with the period, a phrase a professional archaeologist does not use lightly in formal expedition documentation. And fourth, the skeleton itself. In the Sumerian King List, Mes-kiag-gasher is the son of Utu, the sun god, and the founder of the first dynasty of Uruk. He is credited with ruling Eridu for 324 years before the flood. In the post-flood section of the same document, reign lengths average between 6 and 40 years. The difference is not a scribal rounding error. It is a categorical distinction between 2 types of entity. The inscription identifying PG 789 as Mes-kiag-gasher is preserved in the Woolley expedition records at the Penn Museum. It is not disputed. It is simply not discussed. Here is where the physical record becomes impossible to dismiss. The medical officer attached to Woolley's expedition in 1927 was Dr. Grafton Elliot Smith, one of the foremost physical anthropologists working in British archaeology at the time. Smith had catalogued skeletal remains from Egypt, Nubia, and across the Near East. He had examined, by 1927, thousands of ancient human specimens. He was not a man who was easily surprised by unusual bones. His preliminary observations on PG 789, documented in the expedition field notes and partially referenced in a 1931 field summary published in the journal Antiquity, recorded the following. The skeletal frame was consistent with a standing height of approximately 7 to 8 feet. This is 2 to 3 full standard deviations above the documented mean height for ancient Mesopotamian populations. For context, the tallest verified human in recorded modern history stood 8 feet 11 inches. 7 to 8 feet in a Bronze Age skeleton is not a curiosity. It is an outlier with no parallel in the regional record. The bone cortex, the dense outer layer of the long bones, showed a thickness and density not recorded in any contemporary skeletal collection Smith had examined across his career. Greater density means greater structural load capacity. It means this individual could bear weight and apply force that a standard human skeleton would not support. The skull's cranial capacity, estimated from the internal volume of the brain case, exceeded the recorded maximum for Homo sapiens at the time of the 1927 examination, not by a marginal amount, by a degree that fell outside the documented range of human variation. And then there is the rib count. The standard human rib count is 24, 12 pairs. The skeletal remains of PG 789 showed evidence of 13 complete pairs. A cervical rib, a 13th rib occurring at the neck, is documented in approximately 0.5% of modern humans as a minor vestigial variant. It is thin, non-functional, and structurally distinct from the thoracic rib pairs. What Smith's notes describe is a full 13th pair of functional thoracic ribs with corresponding vertebral attachment points. This is not a documented variant. It does not appear in the medical literature as a known human morphological possibility. The vertebral column showed an anomalous lumbar count. Standard human lumbar vertebrae number 5. PG 789 showed 6. Smith's notes, as referenced in the 1931 Antiquity summary, conclude with a sentence that is, in the context of formal archaeological reporting, remarkable. These remains present morphological characteristics that cannot be reconciled with any known variant of Homo sapiens and require further specialist examination before classification can proceed. That specialist examination was never conducted. The bones were shipped to the British Museum in 1928. They were returned to the Iraqi government in 1958. After 1968, they disappear from academic literature entirely. Not because they were lost, because no institution with the standing to examine them has chosen to try. Here is what makes PG 789 something beyond a single anomalous excavation. The physical profile documented at anomalous height, exceptional bone density, enlarged cranial capacity, additional ribs, additional vertebrae, is not unique to Mesopotamia. It appears with enough consistency to constitute a pattern across cultures that had no documented contact with each other. 1928, the same year Woolley's expedition was processing the PG 789 remains. Archaeologists working on the Paracas Peninsula on the southern coast of Peru were recovering a different category of skeletal anomaly. The Paracas skulls, currently housed at the Regional Museum of Isa, show elongated cranial structures with an internal volume approximately 25% larger than the documented maximum for Homo sapiens. The standard explanation for cranial elongation is intentional head binding, a practice documented in several ancient cultures. Head binding reshapes bone. It compresses and redirects growth. What it cannot do is add material. You cannot increase the internal volume of a skull by binding it. The Paracas skulls have more cranial capacity, not just a different distribution of the same capacity. In 2018, Brian Furster, an independent researcher who has spent over a decade cataloging these specimens, submitted multiple Paracas skull samples to 2 separate forensic DNA laboratories, one in the United States, one in Germany. The mitochondrial DNA results showed haplogroups that did not correspond to any known Native American, European, or Asian genetic lineage. Those results were published. 3 days later, the newsletter was removed. The conference presentation was not archived. The laboratories have not issued follow-up statements. Now consider what the Book of Enoch records. The Book of Enoch is not a marginal text. It was considered canonical scripture by the early Christian Church. It remains canonical today in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the oldest continuous Christian denomination on earth. It was removed from the Western biblical canon at the Council of Laodicea in 363 AD. It predates the oldest surviving copies of the Old Testament. Chapter 7 of the Book of Enoch describes a group called the Watchers, beings who descended from the sky and produced offspring with human women. Those offspring were called the Nephilim. The text does not describe them as spiritual or supernatural. It describes them as physical, biological, and mortal. They ate, they exerted force, they died. Their height is given as 300 cubits, a figure that, regardless of which cubit measurement you apply, consistently positions them far outside standard human proportions. The Sumerian equivalent, the Anunnaki, appear in texts from the same period using overlapping language. Beings who came from the heavens, who interacted physically with the human population, who possessed knowledge their contemporaries described as divine, but which the texts treat as technical and transmissible. What those two textual traditions share with PG 789 is a consistent biological profile: significant height, anomalous skeletal features, extraordinary physical capacity. And in every case, every single case, the physical evidence has been suppressed, reclassified, or removed from accessible research. 6,000 miles from Ur, 1 year after PG 789 was excavated, the same profile was appearing in Peruvian sediment. Two independent textual traditions, from cultures with no documented contact, describe the same entity using the same physical language. That is not a coincidence of mythology. It is a convergence that requires an explanation. The PG 789 remains did not disappear because of administrative failure. They disappeared because of a decision. In 1966, a team from the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago submitted a formal request to the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities for a comprehensive re-examination of the Ur royal tombs material using updated forensic methods, including bone density analysis techniques that had become available in the early 1960s. The request specified PG 789 by catalog number. The request was denied. The denial letter, referenced in two subsequent archaeological correspondence collections, cited ongoing cataloging procedures as the reason. The following year, Iraq entered a period of significant political transition. By 1968, the Ba'ath Party had consolidated governmental control. Access to museum archives required government approval. PG 789 stopped appearing in academic literature. That would be explicable as a casualty of political instability, if that were the complete account. Between 1958, when the remains were returned to Iraq, and 1968, when they disappeared from discussion, 3 independent researchers applied through official channels to arrange access. All 3 were denied, not by the Iraqi government, by the British Museum, which retained custody of the expedition documentation and was the only institution with the formal authority to request access on behalf of Western researchers. This is documented in the correspondence archives of the Iraq Archaeological Survey held at the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, London. The bones exist, the expedition documentation exists, the denials exist. What does not exist is a published, peer-reviewed modern forensic analysis of PG 789. Since 1968, the following analytical methods have become available: mitochondrial DNA sequencing, isotopic dating accurate to within decades, micro-CT scanning capable of resolving internal bone structure at sub-millimeter precision, and advanced density measurement that can establish population comparisons across thousands of specimens in hours. Not one of them has been applied to PG 789. The question is not whether the technology exists to resolve this. The technology has existed for 30 years. The question is why no institution with the standing to formally request access has chosen to make that request, and what the answer to that question tells us about how we manage discoveries that don't fit. The story of Mes-kiag-gasher does not remain unfinished because the evidence is insufficient. It remains unfinished because the questions it raises are considered too disruptive to pursue. Consider what this means, not just for archaeology, but for how you read every ancient text that comes after this. The Sumerian King List is not the only document that draws a hard division between pre-flood rulers and post-flood rulers. The Book of Genesis does it. The Epic of Gilgamesh does it. Vedic texts do it. Every major ancient tradition that addresses human origins makes the same distinction between the beings who existed before a catastrophic flood event and the humans who came after. We have been taught to read that distinction as mythological decoration, the work of ancient minds attempting to explain phenomena they could not understand through the available vocabulary of the supernatural. But what if the distinction is biological? What if the division in the King List between pre-flood rulers with 324-year reigns and post-flood rulers with 6-year reigns reflects an actual categorical difference in the organisms being described? If PG 789 is what the 1927 physical record indicates, a specimen that does not correspond to Homo sapiens, then the pre-flood section of the King List is not mythology. It is a record of a different population. And the flood is not a metaphor for divine punishment. It is a transition event that separated two distinct biological eras of human history. That changes archaeology, but it also changes something more personal than that. Because if those pre-flood rulers carried biological characteristics that are now anomalies in the modern human population, an extra rib pair, an additional lumbar vertebra, expanded cranial capacity, and if those characteristics appear in scattered populations across multiple continents today, then the question of what Mes-kiag-gasher was is also, in some register, a question about what you are and what your relationship is to the civilizations that existed before the record we have been given begins. That is the story of the Sumerian king whose bones do not match our species, and what the physical record, when you go back to the original documentation, actually says. If you want to see more content that goes to the primary source rather than the summary, subscribe now.